Hey guys, welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study, a plain and simple book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse study through the entire Bible. Currently, we are in Matthew chapter 22. I want to kind of retrace a passage we kind of started last time and just want to highlight one statement about when Jesus made the statement, rendering unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's and rendered unto God the things that are God. And and so and sometimes we kind of wonder about this. Now, in truth, Jesus is not necessarily teaching the dynamics of what that means. In other words, rendering unto Caesar what is Caesar, the things of the world. Um, and of course, where is the dividing line? Okay. So, but I did want to kind of just go back and I want to take a look at it again. And then just kind of tackle it for a minute. All right, let's go bring my scriptures up here. All right. All right, here we go. Verse 15 again. It says, Then the Pharisees went and plotted how to trap him by what he said. Okay. And they sent their disciples to him with the Herodians. Teacher, they said, we know that you are truthful and teach truthfully the way of God. You defer to no one, for you do not show partiality. Now, of course, this sounds good, but and of course, they probably thinking Jesus is, believing their hypocrisy. Because as they are speaking this, they're not practicing the very thing that they're talking about, which also speaks to their guilt. They show partiality. And if they're saying, now get this, if they're saying, we know that you are truthful and then teach truthfully the way of God, if this is their confession, then why aren't they following him? See, why aren't they believing his preaching and his teachings? In other words, this statement itself condemns them because they acknowledge, we know you're truthful and you teach truthfully the way of God. So if that's true, then everything that he said about them, shouldn't they be repenting? So he says, you defer to no one and you don't show partiality. Now, tell us therefore what you think. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Now again, this was of course a trap that they were stupid enough to think that Jesus was stupid enough to fall for their trap. So if Jesus had said, no, don't pay taxes, and really if you think about it, other than the zealots at the time, you had groups, they were called zealots. They were kind of a militant faction that resisted and fought against the tyranny of Rome. Now, Barabbas, and we will later come to know him, Barabbas was believed to be a zealot. That he calls it insurrection, committed murder. Which is, by the way, this is one of the things that the Pharisees were all, Rome, and also the Pharisees, the Sanhedrin, um, always, they hated this because um, if they were irritant to Rome, and if they got out of hand, Rome would blame the leaders and then come down hard on them. So they probably would be the ones that would say, do not pay taxes to Caesar. They would cause these insurrections every now and then. So when he says, do we pay taxes to Caesar or not? If Jesus had said, don't pay taxes. Then, of course, they could have hauled him off to Pilate and said he is a insurrectionist and had him crucified, had him brought up on charges. He says, but perceiving their malice, Jesus said, why are you testing me, hypocrites? Show me the coin used for the tax. So they brought him a denarius, again, which is the day's page. Whose image and inscription is this? He asked them. Caesar's, they said to him. Then he said to them, therefore give back to Caesar the things that are Caesar, and to God the things that are God. And when they heard this, they were amazed. And so they left him and went away. In other words, they didn't fall for his trap. Now, are there limits to this statement here? Of course there is. If Caesar said, worship me, for example, we know in Daniel chapter 3 where Nebuchadnezzar built this image and he commanded all of his kingdom to bow down and worship. Well, this doesn't apply to that. When he said to give back to Caesar. And as you saw, everyone except the 3 Hebrew boys did not bow. And as a result, they were thrown in the furnace, the fiery furnace. So see, in that case, you wouldn't bow. You would not give back to Caesar the things of Caesar if it was called worship. By the way, just so you know this too, the word God or even Savior was ascribed to Caesar. That the term God was ascribed, in other words, a Savior, they would shout sometimes Caesar as Savior. So again, my point is that there's just limits here. Give back to Caesar the things that are Caesar. Okay, here's this tax money. Give it back to him. Right? Here, give it back to him. But he's not telling us to worship or follow the ungodly ways of Caesar, in our case, society. All right, now verse 23, he says, now the same day, some Sadducees who say there is no resurrection came up to him and questioned him. Now the Sadducees, again, this is another kind of stupid argument or reasoning, because you're going to argue about something everyone knows you don't believe in. Now, I get sometimes those debates. For example, I have a Muslim person who will email me or video chat me from somewhere in the Middle East. And he will want to argue about the deity of Jesus Christ. When, okay, I know you do not believe in the deity of Jesus Christ. And I said to him, so why are you arguing about it when you do not believe it? In other words, there's no argument that I can make. You start off the point that you don't believe in it. Now, the Sadducees were a part of the Sanhedrin. They were part of the group that Rome installed over time. The Sadducees and the Pharisees, they came along about 160, somewhere around that time, years before Christ. Not long after the rise of the Roman Empire. But they were these groups, the Sadducees, Herod's kingdom, and they were installed, again, to keep Israel in line. The Sadducees were part of the religious faction. Now, the difference between the Sadducees and the Pharisees, that the Pharisees, even though they were smaller in number, they were more, they held more strictly to the Old Testament law. Okay, even though they were hypocrites, even though they wasn't following, but they certainly held to the more strict part or section of the Old Testament law. Now the Sadducees, on the other hand, they were a larger number, but they were less influential. In other words, the Pharisees held more influence They were more prominent. And here I wanted to think about the Sadducees. They had this crazy belief where they accepted the law of Moses, but notice he said they don't believe that there is a resurrection. I don't believe they believe in angels, which is kind of weird since if you hold to the law, if you believe in the law, and the law certainly says that it was given by angels, right? So again, these were groups and they certainly reflect modern day religion. That if you look at the Sadducees would say that they would kind of represent the more progressive arm of, let's say, Christianity today. And then the Pharisees would represent more of the conservative side. But both are hypocritical. Like when you think about the evangelicals today and then their support for 47, you see that that is exactly a pharisaical gesture. Now, the Sadducees were more progressive, you could say. They were more progressive. Not only just liberal, but progressive, because notice they didn't believe in the resurrection. Then what is it that how can you hold to that truth, right? So then he said, verse 24, teacher, Moses said, if a man dies, having no children, his brother is to marry his wife and raise up offspring for his brother. Now, this is one of the most perplexing cultures that made its way into the law. So if you go back even under Abraham, the sons of Abraham, and there's this event where Judah had broken away, and he had this maybe some almost 20 years where he was away from his family. He went out and he was doing his own thing. And this is where you see Tamar come into play. That Tamar had married his son. And then what happened is that when the son died, then his son died. So the custom was that if he died with no children, so if a man died and he did not have a son to carry on the name, then somebody came up with this. I don't know where it came up, but somebody would then come in. The next brother in line would actually go into the wife, have sex with the wife, get her pregnant, and then that child would carry on the name of the dead brother. Right? This made its way into the law, the same thing. So the same thing, if a man died, then his next of kin or his brother would go in and have, sex with his brother's wife. And then it would only be limited to that one. In other words, he wasn't supposed to keep sleeping with her. Just supposed to have like one child. And it always caused problems too. It caused problems because you have guys that would say, well, wait a minute, what about my seed? And maybe I want my firstborn, to carry on my seed. And it caused a lot of problems. And so, but it made its way into the law of Moses. So now they're asking this question, right? They say, here is the command. This is what's in the law. This is in the law of Moses. Let me show you something. Let's see, Deuteronomy 25. Let's go to Deuteronomy 25. Let's look at it in there. And like I say, it actually starts in I think it's one of the craziest thing you could see here. All right, so here it is. It says, verse 5, when brothers live on the same property and one of them dies without a son, the wife of the dead man may not marry a stranger outside the family. Her brother-in-law is to take her as his wife, have sexual relations with her, and perform the duty of the brother-in-law for her. The first son she bears will carry on the name of the dead brother, so his name will not be blotted out from Israel. But if the man doesn't want to marry his sister-in-law, she must go to the elders at the city gate and say, my brother-in-law refuses to preserve his brother's name in Israel. He isn't willing to perform the duty of the brother-in-law for me. The elders of the cities will summon him and speak with him. And if he persists and says, I do not want to marry her, then his sister-in-law will go up to him in the sight of the elders, remove his sandal from his foot, spit in his face. Then she would declare, this is what is done to the man who will not build up his brother's house, and his family name in Israel will be called the house of the man whose sandals was removed. So again, strange law here. Strange law. So this is what they're asking him. That's what they're citing. So then here is their gotcha, right? Their gotcha question. He says, now there were 7 brothers among us. The first got married and died. Having no offspring, he left his wife to his brother. The same happened to the second, also the third, and so on, and all to the 7th. Then last of all, the woman died, and in the resurrection, which they don't believe in, therefore whose wife will she be of the 7? For they all had married her. So, right? And then you can probably see them high-fiving each other. And Jesus answered, you are deceived, because you do not know the scriptures or the power of God. For in the resurrection they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like the angels in heaven. Now concerning the resurrection of the dead, haven't you read what was spoken to you by God? I am the God of Abraham, and the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He is not the God of the dead, but of the living. So there's a couple of things Jesus brings out here. Now watch this. When the crowds heard this, they were astonished at his teaching. So now what is interesting, again here, you see 2 things going on that Jesus said. For first and foremost, there's not, and he gives us some insight that when we die, that there will not be marriages in the afterlife. Now, why is that? Because marriage is a flesh thing. It is a flesh bond. And so when 2 people are married, they are only bonded by their flesh. So when death happens, it breaks that bond. So like, for example, those who have lost their spouses, then that bond of marriage is broken. So now in heaven, you're not going to be married. Now, as believers, you're going to have so much more. But he says they're like the angels in heaven, meaning they're not married. Now, when we think about certain aspects of marriage, and from our fleshly perspective, it is hard to see how the glories of marriage. You know, like when you think about like now, we can envision what, at the very least, what marriage should be. But what I'm going to say, what I would challenge is that marriage, I mean, your existence and what the inheritance that God has for the believers will far exceed missing out on sex. Okay. And I say that because that's probably the biggest kind of the greatest bond there, what we enjoy. Because, you know, while, for example, I can enjoy fellowship with my wife, or I can enjoy fellowship with a whole bunch of people in heaven. So, but what makes marriage great is the sexual union part of it. So he says that so there's no marriage in the resurrection. Now he does mention the resurrection, and the idea of the resurrection is when the body stands. It is the and so the resurrection. There, you could almost say there's different resurrections. There is a resurrection of the just and unjust, but its body stand, okay? But so there so but there will be no marriage in heaven. And one of the things he says is that, and when he says that, it's almost like he says, oh, now, just so you know, God is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He's not the God of the dead, but of the living. Think about this. Go back to the Mountain of Transfiguration. And by the way, remember, they don't see this. As Jesus is teaching this, they didn't see that. Only Peter, James, and John saw the Mount of Transfiguration. Only Peter, James, and John saw Elijah and Moses. But understand, so when Jesus says that he's not the God of the dead, but of the living, why? Because there is no cessation of existence or consciousness as a believer. Actually, pretty much, whether you're a believer or not, it's just a matter of where, but there's no ceasing of existence or consciousness. If you're not a believer, your consciousness will exist in hell. That, as we read, remember, and if you look at the rich man and the poor man, the parable of the rich man and poor man in Luke chapter 16, you see two examples of people that are alive. You see two examples of people that after they died, existence went on, consciousness went on, memory went on. And we saw this same when Elijah and Moses appeared to Jesus on the Mount of Transfiguration. Moses had been dead for some 1,500 years. Elijah had been dead for some 1,800 years. They show up and start talking with Jesus. That's why Jesus says he's not the God of the dead, meaning there's nothing, there's no succession. There's a succession of consciousness. They are very much alive. They're very much aware. Think about that picture there. They were talking to Jesus, and we know what they were talking about. He was talking to Jesus about what he was going to accomplish at Jerusalem, the death. So, let's just think, when you think about those images, the parable that Jesus told, or the story that Jesus told in Luke chapter 16, when the rich man died and said, in hell, he lifted up his eyes, in hell, he was tormented, but he looked over and he goes, there's Abraham. And then there's that dude that was begging at my table. That dude begging at my table. Right? He used to beg for my crumbs. He used to beg. So again, that's why he says he's not the God of the dead. And then, of course, what does the dead mean? Because we think from the perspective of physical death, right? From the sense of physical death, because our bodies cease to function. When Adam ate of the fruit, we spiritually died, which means, but Adam lived 930 years later, but we spiritually died. Meaning that we were separated from God. When we physically die, our spirits are separated from our bodies. And that our spirits are separated from our bodies, however, our spirits continue. So he says, this is why he says then, you guys are deceived because you don't know the scriptures or the power of God. And then he goes on and says, for in the resurrection, they need to marry or given in marriage. So the idea of the resurrection is not going to be physical. It's not going to be physical. Actually, it's going to be a lot more. The resurrection that God has in store for us, our bodies will be like unto the bodies of Jesus. We're going to have bodies like Jesus. So, all right. So he kind of blasts them and says, you guys are just plain stupid, okay? And it was. The reason why it was so stupid is because you're asking a question you don't even believe in. You're asking a question that you know you don't believe in a resurrection. Silly. All right, guys, don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comments section below. All comments are welcome. I'll see you in the next study.